All right, everybody, welcome back. Let's dive into something we all experience, right? Figuring out where to eat
Hmm.
and navigating all the restaurant talk that comes along with it.
It is funny how, we don't always think about how much communication goes into a simple meal out with friends.
Right.
It's way more than just pointing at a menu, right? You're throwing out ideas, describing what you're craving, maybe even politely dodging a suggestion that's so not your style.
Oh, absolutely. And if you're not a native English speaker, all those little phrases and nuances, they can feel like a whole other menu to decode.
Exactly. But that's why we're here, right? To break it all down and make it feel a little less intimidating. So let's start with that moment, right? When everyone's stomach is rumbling and you need to kind of kick off that suggestion process. How do you, as a listener, usually approach that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most people would just blurt out, where do you guys want to eat? Or any suggestions. But I bet there are some smoother ways to phrase it, right?
Definitely. Even just a slight tweak can make a difference. So instead of just suggestions, you could say, do you have any thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you have any ideas? It just sounds a bit more, I don't know, thoughtful and engaging.
Oh, I like that. It shows you're genuinely interested in what other people are thinking. What about when someone suggests the place and you want to second it enthusiastically? I feel like I overuse, like, yeah, that sounds good.
I hear you. That's where those little contractions that we've talked about can come in handy. So instead of, I would recommend that place, you can shorten it to, I recommend it. It
Yeah.
sounds more casual, more like you're part of the group.
And you know what else I've noticed? People often say, you got to try this place. Instead of the full, you have got to try it. It's like a secret code for sounding more like a native speaker.
That's such a great observation. And it's not just about sounding more natural. Those contractions actually convey a sense of shared excitement, right? Like you're in on the secret with the listener.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's like you're welcoming them into your world of food experiences. Okay, so let's say we've got a few suggestions on the table. Now we need to kind of figure out what kind of places we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
What happens when someone throws out a word like bistro? Are we talking fancy white tablecloths?
Not necessarily. A bistro has a very specific vibe. Imagine like a small, cozy place, maybe with a little bit of a Parisian feel. It's not going to be super expensive, but it's also not the cheapest option either. Think casual, yet chic.
Got it. So not your average greasy spoon diner. And you know what's interesting? The word bistro itself has a cool history. It actually originated in Paris in the 19th century. And it was originally a term for the small, informal restaurants where working-class Parisians would grab a quick and affordable meal.
That's right. So when you say bistro today, you're tapping into that whole cultural legacy. It's more than just a word. It's a window into a specific time and place.
I love that.
Yeah.
So on the opposite end of the spectrum, what if someone suggests a hole in the wall?
Ugh, hole in the wall. Now that's where things get exciting. We're talking about a place that's probably unassuming from the outside, maybe even a little rough around the edges, but the food, oh, the food is likely to be incredible.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But hold on, do all holes in the wall have amazing food? Or is there like an element of risk involved?
That's a great question. And honestly, there is a bit of a gamble. Sometimes a hole in the wall is just, well, a hole in the wall. But that's part of the fun, right? Discovering those hidden gems that only locals know about.
Absolutely. It's like a culinary treasure hunt.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a restaurant type sorted. Now let's talk food.
Hmm.
What are some ways to describe how delicious something tastes beyond just like the usual good or tasty?
Well, if you want to take it up a notch, you could say something is outstanding. It conveys a sense of exceeding expectations, of being truly memorable.
I like that. Outstanding has a nice ring to it. And, it's interesting how different cultures use different words to express deliciousness. In some languages, there are multiple words for delicious, depending on the type of food, the texture, even the temperature.
That's so cool. It just goes to show how deeply food is ingrained in our cultures and languages.
All right, so we've covered the positive side. But what about when you're not so keen on a suggestion? How do you politely decline without being a total buzzkill?
There's a great phrase for that. I'm not all that crazy about. It's a gentle way to express a dislike, right? Without sounding too harsh. For example, you could say, I'm not all that crazy about spicy food. And it gets the point across without offending anyone.
Oh, that's perfect. It's all about being diplomatic, right? You don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but you also don't want to end up eating something you really don't enjoy.
Exactly. And you know what else can be tricky? Describing food that's not heavy or greasy. People often use the word light for that, but light can mean different things to different people.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Light could mean low in calories. Or it could mean simple and easy to digest. It's important to be specific, I guess.
Absolutely. So you could say, like, I'm in the mood for something light and refreshing, or I'm trying to eat lighter today, so maybe something with lots of veggies. The clearer you are, the better.
Okay, I'm loving all these tips. It's amazing how much nuance there is in everyday restaurant talk. But before we get into part two of this deep dive, I want to share a little anecdote, something that happened to me a while back that taught me a valuable lesson about food and communication.
Ooh, a story I'm all ears.
Well, I was traveling in Morocco a few years ago, and I had this incredible experience at a local market. The sights, the smells, the energy, it was all so vibrant and exciting.
That sounds amazing. I can just picture it.
Right. Well, I got caught up in the moment, and I ended up drinking some freshly squeezed orange juice from a street vendor. It tasted incredible, so refreshing in the heat, but let's just say it didn't end well.
Oh no, food poisoning.
Yeah, you guessed it. It turns out that even something as seemingly harmless as orange juice can be a source of trouble if the water used to wash the fruit isn't clean.
Wow, that's a good reminder that food safety standards can vary widely from place to place. What did you learn from that experience?
Well, for one thing, it made me realize the importance of being cautious, especially when traveling to regions where, you're not familiar with the local customs and hygiene practices. But it also made me think about how we communicate about food, especially when it comes to expressing concerns about safety or cleanliness. How do you politely address those issues without offending anyone or sounding like a germaphobe? We'll explore that and more in part two of this deep dive. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the language of dining out.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about that orange juice incident in Morocco.
Mhm.
It really highlights how important clear communication is, especially when you have concerns about food safety. But it can be tricky. Like, how do you navigate those conversations without sounding judgmental or making someone uncomfortable?
You're absolutely right. It is a delicate balance. You want to be respectful, right, of local customs and the people preparing your food. But you also have a right to feel safe and confident about what you're eating. So what can you do?
Well, I remember reading about a technique where you kind of phrase your questions indirectly. So, like, instead of directly asking about hygiene practices, you could say something like, I'm a little sensitive to spicy food. Could you tell me a bit more about how this dish is prepared?
That's a clever strategy. By framing it as a personal preference, you're subtly gathering information without putting anyone on the spot. You're essentially saying, like, I trust you, but I need a little reassurance.
Exactly. And, it's not just about food safety. Sometimes you might have dietary restrictions or allergies that you need to communicate effectively.
Mhm.
Like, how do you tell someone you're vegetarian without making it seem like a huge inconvenience?
That's a common concern, especially in cultures where meat is such a staple part of the cuisine. I think the key is to be upfront and clear from the beginning. So when you're ordering, you could say something like, I'm vegetarian, so I'm looking for dishes without meat or fish. Could you recommend something? By being proactive, you're taking control of the situation and making it easier for everyone to accommodate your needs.
That makes so much sense. And I bet that approach works well in all sorts of situations, not just when you're dining out. Being clear and assertive about your needs, while still being respectful of others, it's a valuable skill to have in any communication scenario.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot between expressing yourself confidently and being mindful of the other person's perspective.
Okay, let's kind of shift gears a bit and go back to some of those phrases we were discussing earlier. I'm curious, are there any other contractions or shortcuts that can help you sound more natural when talking about food?
Oh, definitely. One that comes to mind is gonna, which is a shortened form of going to, and it's super common in everyday speech. So instead of saying, I am going to try the pizza, you would say, I'm going to try the pizza.
Right. Gona makes it sound so much more casual and effortless. It's
Mhm.
like you're already picturing yourself like taking that first delicious bite.
Exactly. And another one is wanna, which is short for want to. So instead of, do you want to share an appetizer? You'd say, want to share an appetizer.
Ooh, I love that. Wanna is so playful and inviting. It's perfect for that, casual sharing is caring vibe you get at a restaurant.
It's funny how these little words can have such a big impact on the tone and the meaning of what we're saying. It's almost like a secret language that native speakers just use instinctively.
It totally is. And once you start paying attention to these nuances, you start hearing them everywhere. It's like unlocking a hidden level of communication.
All right, let's talk about another essential aspect of restaurant talk, expressing preferences. Sometimes, you're just not in the mood for a certain type of food, right? Maybe you're trying to eat healthier, or maybe you just have a specific craving. How do you politely communicate that?
Well, we already talked about the I'm not all that crazy about phrase, which is great for gently declining suggestions. But what about when you're trying to be more specific about what you do want?
That's where the phrase "in the mood for" comes in handy. It's a simple but powerful way to signal your desire for a particular type of food or experience. For example, you could say, "I'm really in the mood for something spicy tonight," or "I'm craving something light and refreshing."
Oh, I love that. In the mood for kind of implies that it's like a temporary desire, so it doesn't sound like you're being, picky or inflexible.
Right. It's all about framing your preferences in a way that feels positive and collaborative. You're not rejecting other people's suggestions. You're simply expressing your own unique desire in that moment.
Okay, let's talk about a situation that I know a lot of people struggle with, which is dealing with food that's not quite right. Maybe it's overcooked, underseasoned, or just not what you expected. It can be awkward to speak up, but you also don't want to suffer in silence. What's the best way to handle those situations?
That's a great question. And I think it depends on the severity of the issue.
Mhm.
If it's a minor thing, like let's say a steak that's a little more well done than you requested, you could politely ask the server if they could, have the chef take another look at it. But if
Yeah,
it's something more serious, like a dish that's inedible or makes you feel uncomfortable, you need to be more assertive.
right. You don't want to be afraid to speak up for yourself, especially if your health or safety is at stake.
Yeah.
But how do you do that without coming across as, rude or demanding?
I think the key is to be calm, clear, and specific. Instead of saying, "this is terrible," you could say something like, "excuse me, but I'm having a problem with this dish. It seems to be undercooked, and I'm concerned about food safety."
Okay, that's a much better approach. By focusing on the specific issue and expressing your concern, you're more likely to get a positive response. And you know what else can be helpful? Using I statements instead of blaming or accusing the restaurant.
That's a great tip. Instead of saying, "you messed up my order," you could say, "I'm afraid there's been a mistake with my order. I ordered the salmon, but I received the chicken."
Exactly. It's all about taking ownership of your experience and communicating your needs in a respectful and constructive way. And you know what else can be helpful? Remembering that the server is not the enemy. They're usually just trying to do their job, and they often have very little control over what happens in the kitchen.
That's so true. By being understanding and working together with the server, you're much more likely to find a solution that everyone can live with. And sometimes a little bit of kindness and humor can go a long way in smoothing over any bumps in the road.
Okay, before we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive, I want to touch on one more aspect of restaurant communication that can be tricky, which is navigating cultural differences. We already talked about how food safety standards can vary, but there are also subtle differences in dining etiquette that can be confusing or even offensive if you're not aware of them.
You're absolutely right. For example, in some cultures, it's considered rude to refuse food that's offered to you, while in others, it's perfectly acceptable to decline. And things like tipping customs, seating arrangements, even how you use your chopsticks can vary widely from country to country.
Wow, that's a lot to keep in mind. So, how do you even begin to navigate all these cultural nuances? Is there a secret to avoiding embarrassing faux pas?
Well, there's no foolproof method, but I think the most important thing is to be aware of the potential for cultural differences and to approach every situation with an open mind and a willingness to learn. Do a little research before you travel, observe how locals behave, and don't be afraid to ask questions if you're unsure about something.
Okay, I love that. It's all about being curious and respectful and embracing those differences as part of the adventure. And you know what else can be helpful? Learning a few basic phrases in the local language. Even just being able to say hello, thank you, and please can go a long way in showing that you're making an effort.
That's a great point. It shows that you're not just a tourist passing through, but someone who's genuinely interested in connecting with the local culture.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We talked about handling tricky situations, mastering those essential contractions, expressing preferences, and even navigating cultural differences.
Yeah.
But there's one more area I want to explore before we wrap up, the art of giving restaurant recommendations. How do you describe a place in a way that captures its essence and makes people want to try it? We'll delve into that and more in part 3 of this deep dive. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the language of dining. We've talked about everything from asking for suggestions to handling those tricky situations, but now I want to get to the fun part, giving restaurant recommendations. It's like being like being a culinary ambassador, right?
Yeah.
Sharing your favorite spots of the world.
I love that analogy. It's true. Giving a good restaurant recommendation is an art form, you know? You want to paint a picture with your words, you want to capture the atmosphere, the flavors, the overall experience in a way that makes people want to, like, book a table immediately.
Exactly. So let's say a friend asks you for a recommendation, right? For a romantic dinner spot. What are some key details you would focus on?
Well, first, I'd want to get a sense of their preferences, right? What kind of cuisine do they enjoy? Are they looking for something intimate and cozy or something a bit more, I don't know, lively and upscale?
Right. It's all about tailoring the recommendation to the specific person and the occasion. You wouldn't recommend a bustling tapas bar for a quiet anniversary dinner.
Exactly. Once you have a good understanding of what they're looking for, you can start to paint a picture with your words. You could say something like, there's this incredible little Italian place tucked away on a quiet side street. It's got this warm, romantic ambiance with dim lighting and soft music playing in the background. And the food is absolutely divine, especially the pasta dishes. They make everything from scratch, and you can really taste the love and care that goes into each plate.
Ooh, I'm sold. I can practically smell the garlic and basil, wafting through the air.
And you know what else can be really effective? Using sensory details to bring the experience to life. Absolutely. Don't just say the food is good, right? Describe the specific flavors and textures. Is it spicy, savory, sweet, tangy? Is the meat tender and juicy, or is the bread crusty and warm? The more vivid your description, the more your listener will feel like they're actually there.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about recommending places that are a bit more, off the beaten path. You know those hidden gems that only locals know about?
Ah, those are my favorite kind of recommendations to give. It's like sharing a secret treasure with someone. When describing these places, I like to emphasize their uniqueness and authenticity.
Oh, I love that. Like, what makes them special? Why should someone venture outside their comfort zone to try something new?
Exactly. You could say something like, there's this hole-in-the-wall place downtown that serves the most amazing pho. It's run by this Vietnamese family who have been making it the same way for generations. The broth is so rich and flavorful, it's like a warm hug in a bowl.
Okay, I'm officially adding that to my must-try list. And you know what I've noticed? People often use metaphors and similes to describe food in a way that's really evocative.
That's such a great observation. Saying something is as light as a feather or melts in your mouth like butter, it creates such a strong sensory experience for the listener.
Exactly. It's like you're painting a picture with words, making the food come alive in their imagination.
And you know what else can be helpful? Sharing personal anecdotes or memories associated with the restaurant. If you had a particularly memorable meal there, or even like a funny experience, that can add a layer of authenticity and warmth to your recommendation.
Oh, absolutely. Stories make everything more relatable and engaging. Like you could say, I remember trying this place for the first time on a rainy Tuesday night, and it instantly became my go-to comfort food spot. The atmosphere is so cozy and welcoming, and the food always hits the spot.
Perfect. You're not just recommending a restaurant, right? You're inviting your listener to share in your experience and create their own memories.
I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up this deep dive. We've explored so many aspects of the language of dining, from those essential phrases to those subtle nuances of communication. But ultimately, it all boils down to connection, sharing, and the joy of experiencing food together.
I couldn't agree more. Whether you're asking for a recommendation, giving one, or navigating a tricky situation, remember, clear, respectful communication can enhance any dining experience. And don't be afraid to, embrace those unexpected adventures, try new things, and savor every bite of the journey.
Beautifully said. And remember, the next time you find yourself at a loss for words at the dinner table, take a deep breath, channel your inner culinary ambassador, and let the conversation flow, as smoothly as a perfectly aged Cabernet.
Cheers to that.
Until next time, happy dining, everyone.